All right, so many of you have been following this case with the sexually violent predator, Alvin Quarles. Just moments ago, a few seconds before our 4 o'clock newscast started, Judge David Gill decided to release Quarles early back into our community, most likely into Jacumba Hot Springs. With me to talk more about this is Attorney Vikas Bajaj. Thank you so much for being here to talk about this.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So many people are interested in this because it seemed like a slam dunk for the prosecution that this guy would not get out early. And here we have, I mean, the prosecutors have said, please no. They've given all this evidence why he shouldn't be released early. The victims cried, poured their hearts out, please don't release him early. And now this today. Explain this to people, how this could happen.
Well, sometimes when we have laws that are not clear, it allows for a lot of individuals to allow their own discretion to enter into those laws and interpret those laws. In other words, when laws aren't crystal clear and they allow, for instance, things like conditional releases, then courts and prosecutors and defense attorneys are tasked with the job of trying to make the facts fit into the law. So when we have the allowance for a conditional release, the state legislature has said, well, it is a possibility. So if it's possible, see if it fits in the compartment. So what you see Judge David Gill do and what he's done throughout this case with a lot of methodical research and thought, we would hope, has come to a conclusion that the state legislature allows it. So let's see if the defendant fits in. And through a creative amount of surveillance and extraordinary expenditure of state dollars, we're talking over $1 million from what I read per year to do one individual surveillance upon this conditional release. So it really is an academic exercise to find a way to fit the defendants into the compartments that the state legislature has created. Now let's take a step back. From a public point of view, it's distasteful, and it's something that even as a defense attorney I can say very clearly, as a family man, all you have to do is read through the descriptions of the crimes that this individual has committed. Now, we would always want an individual to have liberty and to smell fresh air if, in fact, that individual was allowed to do that and the punishments allowed for that. However, let's consider this. If this individual was convicted of murder, he would never have this opportunity for a conditional release. So one would argue why this type of offense or these types of offenses deserve any more of a seeking out of liberty. Practically, there's an enormous amount of blowback that I believe the court and the district attorney will feel behind this decision that was made. Practically, it's a real punch in the nose to a lot of people who were specifically affected by it. But again, dovetailing upon your very astute question in the opening comments, it's an allowance in the law, and the fight really is not with the judges who interpret the law a certain way. The fight is with the legislature to not have this be an allowance in our laws in California.
That's what I was going to ask you next. So to give power back to the people, because I think a lot of people thought, and even Ginger said, maybe with the public outrage with this, that will persuade the judge, because he's the first one. This guy went several years in a row trying to get out early. Every judge up until Judge Gill said no. Then he went before Judge Gill. He said okay. So is there something that people can do? Should we just call our lawmakers nonstop to get this, the loophole in this, somehow changed?
Absolutely. And you're asking the very same question we ask in our household when we read about these things in the paper. And that is the only avenue. In order to change the law, the request from the people has to be a popular request. And that means more pressure, more phone calls, professionally and ethically carried out, need to be made and directed towards our state legislators. Other than that, judges and defense attorneys like myself and prosecutors who are on the other side of the aisle for most of the cases have the allowance to try to mince words and maybe find a way to read between the lines and see if an individual fits in a very, very small compartment. You can look forward to appeals, and the appeal bills may be a directive to the higher courts to further define what the law is actually intended to target.
Could the people in Jacumba Hot Springs do something legally to prevent this from happening?
Well, I understand they're already up in arms about this.
Yeah.
And again, contact your local representative and the district attorney's office. Now, our district attorney may not like me saying that, but I will tell you, our district attorney, Summer Stephan, is very reasonable.
She wants him behind bars still.
Absolutely. And I think more and more people voicing that same concern cannot fall upon deaf ears. And I think pressure from all sides, if the goal is to keep individuals like this incarcerated for their full term, needs to be heard loud and clear.
Judge Gill, he's been behind the bench for decades. He's an older man.
Yes.
He'll be there until he decides to leave. There's nothing that would cause him to be stepped down or force him to step down. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct. And I remember very fondly my first trial with Judge David Gill maybe 17 years ago, and it was a horrific set of facts and crimes. And in our motions, Judge David Gill gave us every opportunity to argue these precise nuances in the law.
Wow.
And many times on the defense side, we were victorious.
Wow.
And it sure did a lot to boost our ego. But on the other hand, sometimes one would question the academic exercise in looking for a way to have a defendant fit into an otherwise very minuscule compartment.
Vic, that's a really interesting perspective you just gave us. An academic exercise, people's lives are at stake.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.